tombs of el-Kebir. When I was invited to join the archaeological dig near el-Kebir, I leapt at the chance. The site had always fascinated me, an ancient Egyptian burial ground that predated the reign of Ramses II by centuries, a place steeped in whispers of forbidden rituals and enigmatic relics. My specialty, osteoarchaeology, wasn't exactly glamorous, but it fit this assignment perfectly. The dig's lead, Dr. Ashraf Nazir, believed the site might hold the remains of creatures revered by the Egyptians as sacred emissaries of the god Set, the deity of chaos and darkness. The locals, however, were less enthusiastic. They spoke of El Set with a mixture of fear and reverence. Whenever we tried to press them for details, they would mutter about old bones that bring new death and refuse to elaborate. The warnings only heightened my excitement. Ancient Egyptian mythology had always blurred the lines between history and the supernatural, and I couldn't wait to see what secrets el-Kebir would reveal. We arrived at the tombs in late November, just as the desert winds had begun to cool. The entrance to the burial chamber was carved directly into the rock, a gaping maw that seemed to swallow the sunlight. The air grew colder as we descended, the smell of earth and time growing stronger with each step. Flickering lanterns lit the way, casting long, shifting shadows on walls adorned with faded hieroglyphics. The tomb was unlike anything I'd ever seen. The hieroglyphs told stories not of pharaohs or gods, but of beasts. Massive, lumbering creatures with gaping jaws and jagged teeth, their forms stylized but unmistakable. These were fossils, prehistoric remains that the ancient Egyptians had unearthed and deemed sacred. "This," Dr. Nazir whispered, pointing to an alcove in the corner, "is why we're here." In the alcove lay a collection of bones, wrapped in linen and stacked with meticulous care. They were massive, far larger than any human remains. One skull in particular caught my attention. Its jaw was elongated, filled with sharp, curved teeth. I ran my fingers along the linen, marveling at the craftsmanship. "Crocodile?" I asked, though I knew the answer was far more complicated. "Not quite," Nazir said, his voice tight. "These are the bones of a creature the Egyptians associated with Set himself, the god Chaos. But there's something else here." He gestured for me to follow, leading me deeper into the tomb. We entered a larger chamber, where the walls were covered in more hieroglyphs. These were different, violent and chaotic, depicting humans bowing before monstrous figures. Beneath the carvings was a massive stone sarcophagus, its lid carved with the image of Set in his animal form, a strange amalgamation of a jackal, aardvark, and other creatures. We spent the next week cataloging the bones and translating the hieroglyphs. The inscriptions told a fragmented story, a great beast that had terrorized the land, its body unearthed and given to Set as a tribute. The Egyptians believed these creatures were avatars of chaos, ancient forces that predated humanity itself. One phrase appeared repeatedly, Neferu Gezer Set, which Nazir translated as the sacred flesh of Set. But the more we worked, the more the unease among the team grew. Strange things began to happen. Tools would disappear, only to reappear in places no one remembered leaving them. The air inside the tomb grew colder, far beyond what could be explained by the desert night. And then there were the noises, faint scratching, like something moving within the walls. On the sixth night, we heard the first scream. It came from the outer camp, where our assistant Ahmed had been cataloging artifacts. By the time we reached him, it was too late. His body was sprawled on the ground, his face frozen in a mask of terror. His throat had been torn open, the wound jagged and unnatural, as if made by claws or teeth far larger than any animal in the region. The locals were quick to blame El Set. They claimed we had disturbed something that was meant to remain buried, something the Egyptians had feared and worshipped in equal measure. Nazir dismissed their warnings as superstition, but I wasn't so sure. Ahmed's death didn't feel random. It felt deliberate, as if something had marked him. Despite the growing tension, Nazir insisted we press on. "We're on the verge of a discovery that will rewrite history," he argued. "We can't stop now." The rest of the team wasn't convinced. 2 members quit the next day, refusing to spend another night near the tomb. That left Nazir, myself, and 3 others to continue the work. But by then, the atmosphere had changed. The tomb no longer felt like a place of history. It felt alive, as if the walls themselves were watching us. On the 8th night, I made a breakthrough. One of the inscriptions near the sarcophagus described a ritual meant to appease Set, the sacrifice of flesh, wrapped in linen and buried alongside the bones of his sacred beast. The ritual was meant to prevent the beast's return, binding it to the underworld. I showed Nazir my findings, but he was dismissive. "It's mythology," he said. "A story. Nothing more." But I wasn't so sure. The hieroglyphs spoke of chaos unleashed when the ritual was undone, of the beast rising to reclaim the land. And when I looked at the sarcophagus, I noticed something I hadn't seen before, a crack running along the lid, as if something had tried to force its way out. That night, the scratching grew louder. It was no longer faint or sporadic, it was relentless, echoing through the tomb like claws on stone. The temperature plummeted, our breath visible in the lantern light. And then, just past midnight, we heard it, a deep, guttural growl that shook the very air. Nazir tried to rally the team, but panic had already set in. One by one, they fled, leaving only me and Nazir in the tomb. The growling grew louder, accompanied by the sound of stone grinding against stone. The lid of the sarcophagus was moving. "We need to leave," I whispered, my voice trembling. "No," Nazir said, though his voice betrayed his fear. "This is what we came for. We have to see it." The lid slid further, revealing darkness within. And then it emerged. I don't have the words to describe what we saw. It was massive, its body a grotesque amalgamation of scales, fur, and jagged bone. Its eyes glowed with a sickly green light, and its mouth was filled with teeth that seemed too large for its jaw. It moved with a terrible purpose, its claws scraping against the stone floor. Nazir didn't even have time to scream. I stumbled backward, tripping over a loose stone as the beast stepped fully into the chamber. The air was thick with its presence, a suffocating mix of dread and chaos. Its glowing eyes locked onto mine, and I felt my body freeze as if gripped by an unseen force. But instinct kicked in, and I scrambled to my feet, running toward the narrow passage that led out of the tomb. The beast let out a deafening roar, the sound reverberating through the stone walls and shaking the ground beneath my feet. I didn't dare look back. The lantern I carried flickered wildly, casting erratic shadows as I sprinted through the dark corridor. The scratching of claws on stone followed close behind, growing louder with each passing second. I burst into the main chamber, the alcove with the bones now a blur as I raced past it. The narrow tunnel ahead seemed impossibly far, the entrance a faint pinprick of light in the suffocating darkness. My legs burned, my lungs screamed for air, but I didn't stop. The beast's growls grew louder, almost drowning out the sound of my own pounding heartbeat. As I reached the tunnel, I heard the sound of stone collapsing behind me. I dared to glance over my shoulder and saw the beast, its massive form illuminated by the faint green glow emanating from its eyes. It was faster than it had any right to be, its claws tearing through the stone floor as it closed the distance between us. I stumbled into the tunnel, the narrow walls scraping against my shoulders as I forced myself forward. The beast roared again, its claws raking against the tunnel entrance as it tried to force its bulk through. The walls shook violently, sending chunks of stone raining down around me. I ducked and shielded my head, my body trembling as the roars turned to guttural growls of frustration. And then, silence. For a moment, I thought it had given up. But as I turned back toward the faint light of the tomb's entrance, I realized the silence wasn't an absence of sound, it was the calm before a storm. The ground beneath me began to tremble, and I threw myself forward, crawling on my hands and knees as the tunnel collapsed behind me. I burst out of the tomb just as the entrance caved in, a cloud of dust and debris erupting into the night air. I collapsed onto the sand, coughing and gasping for breath, my body shaking with exhaustion and terror. The roars of the beast were muffled now, trapped beneath the tons of rock and sand that had sealed the tomb. The locals found me at dawn, their faces pale as they listened to my rambling account of what had happened. They didn't ask questions. Instead, they worked quickly to seal the entrance further, muttering prayers to keep whatever lay within from escaping again. The tombs of el-Kebir are silent now, but the memory of that night will haunt me forever. The Egyptians knew what they had buried. They knew it wasn't just a beast, but a force of chaos, bound by rituals we barely understand. I survived, but I will never return. Some things are meant to remain buried.